a suitable age. But when that time arrived, the young woman was found to have a will of her own. She rejected the advances of the swarthy Ute, this is 19th century language, and he took vengeance on the whites for the jilting he had received. The innocent people who had begun to settle in the valley were murdered or driven out, their habitations laid waste, their crops burned, and their cattle stolen. All this happened because of the obstinacy of Miss Ward. So it's interesting to see who a 19th century emigrant blames. This would have actually been Louisa Ward. At the time that Barney Ward was killed in 1865 at the beginning of the Black Hawk War, Polly was visiting Adelaide in Ogden. Louisa Ward was the only one there. So the references to Miss Ward must be to Louisa. Well, after Barney Ward was killed, he had gone up Salina Canyon to try to round up some horses that had been run off by Native Americans. And he was ambushed. He and another man were ambushed and killed. And in the aftermath, Sandpitch came into town and demanded Louisa Ward and said that she had been promised to him. The people in the town refused to turn her over and actually spirited her out of town, and she ended up in the household of Brigham Young for a time. He cared for her and for some time for her sister Polly as well in his household. We have to wonder, did Barney Ward really promise his daughter to Sandpitch? It seems a little hard to believe. And contemporaries actually said, no, that didn't happen. Sandpitch made it up. They blamed him and said he was just trying to get this daughter. And other contemporaries also denied it. And they did what they could to keep Louisa out of his hands. On the other hand, I'm not so sure that he didn't make that promise. I've showed you the examples of many other stories that he told, things that people wanted to hear. He loved to tell stories in which he played the major part. You know, he was the one who saved the Oregon immigrants. He was the one who discovered gold on the Sevier River. He was the one who could confirm that the Hopi were the lost descendants of Welsh Prince Modoc. He could show the people how to get to California by a shorter route. He could make Sandpitch indebted to him, or maybe pay his debts to Sandpitch by promising him his daughter or daughters. Some people claimed it was daughters. Interestingly enough, some contemporaries, including Brigham Young, believed that Ward may have been killed because of this promise. You have to be careful about promising something, anyone, something that they can have only after you die. I am sure that Barney Ward never expected that his time would come so soon. Thank you.
Fascinating, fascinating. I have a couple of questions, I guess. That last bronze statue there, what is that and where is it? Of apparently Sandpitch?
Yes, that is in the Sanpete Valley, and it was only dedicated a few years ago, fairly recently.
And you know sure. where in the Sanpete Valley, where is that?
Let me just call up that slide again, and I will tell you if I can. Let's see.
Just looks like a marvelous bronze. I'm just curious.
It does, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm almost there. Mount Pleasant.
Oh, okay, Mount Pleasant. We know it well. Okay.
So if anyone goes to Mount Pleasant, they can take a look at that statue of Sandpitch.
Huh. Fascinating. How did Barney Ward die? Is it killed in the Black Hawk War? Do you know any more about it than that?
He went up the canyon, and again, he was looking for some horses that had been run off by native people. And when he went up the canyon, he was ambushed. in fact, there's a rock in that canyon that that people claim you can still see his blood on. I went and looked for it. I didn't actually find it, but yeah, he and another man got ambushed, and that was basically the beginning of the Black Hawk War. There had been some rumblings, some rumors, but with the death of those two men, the war started in earnest and lasted the next 3 years.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments from people?
This is Lynette. I have a question. I didn't catch the name of the woman and her sister that ended up being at Brigham Young's house toward the end there.
Yeah, that was Barney's two daughters by Sally. One was Louisa and the other one was Mary, called Polly. So in fact, if you look at census records for the year 1870, one of those daughters appears in Brigham Young's household. I think it's Polly.
Polly, okay. I just got through reading, well, a few months ago, a biography on Eliza Snow, and she mentioned about some various sisters that were given protection in Brigham's house, and I thought I would love to go back and look and see if this, if one of these sisters were mentioned, because that would be really cool.
I would love to see that reference. I am not aware of that reference. Who is it that's speaking?
Oh, this is Lynette McKenzie. If I find it, and I could be, my dad had a few nicknames for me. One of them was Lynettiator, the Forgettiator, so I may be getting my facts mixed up. If I find the references to their names, I'll ask Brother Bounty to get me your email address, and I'll send you the reference on it.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
There's a question in the chat by Debbie Skog asking if any of those groups were the Donner Party and how that might relate to the Donner Party.
Those groups that went through the Death Valley Pioneers, those were not the Donner Party. But the whole kind of history of cutoffs, you've heard of the Lansford Hastings cutoff, which he published in an emigrant's guide, and then went around trying to convince people to follow it, and the Donner Party did, and it ended up costing them dearly. Time that they lost their guaranteed that they got caught in the mountains. Well, when Barney Ward claimed that there was a closer route, he drew a map, and apparently the map was very similar to some of the claims that Lansford Hastings was making as well, that both of them had an east-west mountain range on them that didn't actually exist. We don't have a copy of that map, but that's how people described it.
So this question is going to show my ignorance, but from your story, the implication is that the Black Hawk War was started by this dispute over this girl. Is that?
That's what some people claimed, but not everyone. We have a lot of documents, letters going back and forth. Some people blamed that, like John Codman in the article, or in the bit that I included in my PowerPoint. Yes, he claimed it. But not everybody makes that claim.
What's your conclusion about that?
One of the things about Barney Ward that's fairly well agreed upon is that a lot of Ute Indians were really mad at him. He participated in the first conflict between Latter-day Saint pioneers and Native people in Utah Valley. That sometimes it's called the Ute War. And he had been acting as an interpreter, and the fact that he then joined the people who were attacking Ute Indians in Utah Valley, several contemporaries said that the Utes never forgave him for that, and that his ambushing and murder at the start of the Black Hawk War may have been payback for that. So that connects it to Barney Ward, but he was not the only person. There were a lot of conflicts going on between Native people and various settlers at this time. Controversies over Native people stealing horses, settlers retaliating in sometimes murderous ways. So there was a lot of tension going on. This was a piece of it. I don't think it could have started the war on its own, but I have no doubt that it contributed to it.
Hiram Lewis, welcome to you tonight. Hiram has a question in the chat, if you can see that, or I can read it to you. He says, if Ward went west in the 1830s, that would be a bit later than the mountain men heyday. So what would have been his relationship with Bridger and other famous mountain men?
I have not yet been able to find any documents that put Barney Ward in the company of the people who the 1906 article claimed he was associated with. But that said, we know he was at Fort Bridger, and you really couldn't be at Fort Bridger without knowing Jim Bridger. So he probably did know him. It's just that nobody wrote it down. So he was in that latter part. He was also involved in Fort Hall. One of the things that the obituary, or that the article of the 1906 article says, is that he helped to build Fort Hall. And I have found his name on the ledgers of various fur traders and mountain men who worked out of Fort Hall. So that's an accurate story.
I had another question about languages. You said he was an interpreter and spoke many languages, but now you just indicated that the Utes and the Moki or the Hopi, it's my understanding that those are completely different languages between the Hopi and the then you also mentioned the Flathead and the Blackfeet, which are up northern Montana. And both of those dialects are completely different, my understanding. So, I mean, he would have to be pretty incredible to speak all those four different not only just dialects, but four different complete languages.
It's true. In all the contemporary records that I've seen, he is referred to as a Ute and Shoshone interpreter. And Ute and Shoshone are actually very close. They are mutually intelligible dialects, though they're different in the way that they speak. It's kind of like Italian and Spanish. Maybe even a little closer than that. But he apparently could do Ute and Shoshone. I've never seen any contemporary evidence that he could speak any of those other languages, except for in that story by his friends.
Fascinating. Well, was he actually in Montana? What would the Montana Territory then at that time?
No evidence of that either. But we don't have evidence of everything. Maybe something will turn up.
That's quite a distance there between there.
Yeah. Well, people went all over. Even in the 19th century, it's interesting to see how far people are traveling. And they're going by foot or by horse. As soon as the railroad goes in, they start making those journeys as well. So seems like a lot to us, but they did it regularly.
Yeah. Well, fascinating. Any other questions before we terminate what's been a delightful evening together? Questions or comments to Jenny? Gosh, what's next on your agenda? Have you got another relative that you can talk to us about later? Your relative?
Well, I'm working on this as a book. I want to write about Adelaide and Sally, and Barney Ward will be in there too. He was pretty a bigger figure in my family's life than Baptiste Xervier was, since he died so young. I've been talking about how legends get made, and you might be interested. I published an article this summer about another example of this that's also connected to my family history. I briefly mentioned that Baptiste Xavier gets shot in the back during a drunken brawl on the 4th of July in 1843. Well, we know who shot him. The person who shot him was a guy named Thomas Fallon, who shortly after this incident joined Fremont's expedition and went west and ended up as one of the early mayors of San Jose. And later, much later, 150 plus years later, another mayor of San Jose wanted to erect a statue in his honor, and it created all kinds of controversy within the city. And so my article is looking at both what happened and the controversy that arises from it because of different ways that the story is told and outright lies about what actually happened that lead to a lot of kind of political controversy.
Kind of an off-the-wall question, too. I wanted to ask. Paul Reeve was one of our speakers at an earlier fireside. And in a private conversation with me, he indicated that you had been helpful to him in the Century of Black Mormons database that he's been working on. Can you tell us just a little bit about that? Who that is?
So I wrote one of the biographical sketches in that database of a woman who in the database appears as Nancy Smith. I have really, I could just spend the rest of my life writing about all the very unique stories in my family history, but one of them, I'm also descended from some of the Mississippi converts to the church, many of whom brought enslaved people with them when they came to Utah. And one of them was Nancy Smith. So I am descended from the people who held her in bondage. And it's an interesting story and kind of complicated. She stays in Utah and dies in Utah after emancipation, so she is able to live as a free woman. But there's a lot of interesting stories that go along about her too, and so I worked with Paul to try to recover some of those stories. She was baptized into the church. We have receipts of her paying her tithing at a time when it would have been hard, I think, to be a Black member of the church, but she was. I mean, that could be a whole other story. There are a lot of complicating details.
Well, Lynette McKenzie offers a statement that applies to all of us. Can you come back with more interesting stories?
I would love to.
Good. Well, thank you so much, Jenny. Hiram, in just a minute, I'll ask you if you'll give us a benediction, Hiram Lewis. But let me just tell you a little bit about where we're going here the next week or two. Next Saturday, we'll hear from Brian Hales. Brian Hales is a retired anesthesiologist who spoke to us last year on Joseph Smith's polygamy. He's currently researching the origin of the Book of Mormon. His book on the topic will be published by Crawford Books in 2023. And Brian describes his new presentation as follows. He says, to date, no studies have been asked and answered to try to answer the question, what natural or native skills did Joseph Smith demonstrate for 3 months while dictating the Book of Mormon? This presentation attempts to reverse engineer the creation of the 269,320 word verbal stream to identify those skills and then to examine the historical record to determine what skills Joseph Smith possessed as a 23-year-old farmer in 1829. And in anticipation of that presentation, I sent you all a copy of his handout that he's going to discuss with us next week entitled The Miracle of the Book of Mormon. So I think that'll be a fun fireside to listen to. And then just recently pinned down artist Partial. I don't know, some of you may know of her from her, what's it called, Keep a Pitchin' In blog that she does regularly. She's an accomplished historian in her own right. And just recently, she's discovered another Black Latter-day Saint. Can't quite remember her name. Was it Nancy Hudson, maybe? I'm not positive about that. But anyway, it's a fascinating story about she was examining early records of a Black woman who joined the church in London. and who came with who was intending to come to the States with all of the pioneers, but unfortunately, when she got ready to get on the ship, the individuals there recognized her as being black, and the ship was heading to New Orleans. And they said that immediately as she got there, she would likely be enslaved. And so as a result, she didn't go on that ship, but instead went up to Canada to come there. And she's been lost to history, but nonetheless, it's a fascinating story. And I think artists will tell us either that story or many other stories about unusual Latter-day Saints. So that'll be on the 4th of February, and I think you'll all look forward to that as well. So thanks all of you for joining. Hiram, you got some help there. Can you give us a benediction tonight? Good to see you.
I'd be happy to. Yeah, likewise. Can you hear me okay?
You bet.
Okay. Our Father in heaven, we're thankful for this chance we had to hear Professor Pulsipher and receive her insights. And we're thankful for her example of turning the hearts of the children to the fathers. And we're thankful for Ross for organizing these delightful firesides where we can learn and come together as a community, trying to become more like thee and develop our abilities and move towards the Christian view of life. And we say these things in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks. It's the reminder to Jenny that I always invite people to come up and visit us here in the Northwest. Hiram is one of two that has done that with 130 some presentation. Hiram, good to see you and your family. And Jenny, we'd like to see you and your husband and family up here as well.
I'd love to do it.
Okay. We'll introduce you all to the great Northwest. Thanks again to everybody. Wish you all a good Sabbath. And we're delighted again to have been together tonight in this special occasion. Thank you, Jenny.
Thank you. It was fun. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Jenny.
You're welcome.
Thank
Good
you,
night.
Jenny. Thank you, Jenny. Thank you, Ross and Sharon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.